the
This
end of the meeting
conference will
here,
now be recorded.
one of the things we'll mention at the end of the meeting here is what we're going to do for next week. We'll talk just a little bit about that. But thanks for being with us. I think there's one or two new folks, or maybe they have logged in with different initials or something. So if you're new, thanks for being with us here today. I think our goal is to be relatively quick and efficient with meeting. Lots of people have lots of things going on. There's been a couple of developments over the last day or two. And so I know Patrick and John will probably be covering one of those, and Russ or I will be covering the other. Let me get out of the way. Ed, we always give you a chance to talk about the partnership and things with the chamber, so why don't you go first here?
Okay, boy, thanks right out of the gate. We always say thanks for tuning in, everyone. I think our number is higher this week than it was last week. My phone is going to ring 3 times. I apologize for that. It rings a lot these days. Specifically, we want to say thanks to all of our partners, but specifically thanks to Greater Mankato Growth for their blog. And they talk about this safe reopening, and I put safe in quotation marks. So hopefully John and Patrick can speak more about that. Just a couple of notes about the safe reopening document for businesses. It comes from the state chamber, and we were on a call with them yesterday with the state leaders so they could kind of explain it. There will come a time with this phased approach that more businesses will be allowed to open. And we've already seen Monday, more businesses are allowed to open. But what does it look like as businesses start to reopen? And the assumption is that no customers want to shop in a place where they don't feel safe from the virus, and no employees want to work in a setting that's where there's not measures taken to kind of get away from this, or at least reduce the chances of getting this nasty, terrible virus. So the state chamber, working with CDC and others, created this document to help businesses. They got advice from the businesses that are currently open. Something like 4,000 businesses kind of weighed in and offered their advice. So they took the best of the best advice, and they put together this document for, do you put plexiglass between yourself and the customers at the cash registers? Are you constantly sanitizing? What do you do with doorknobs? There's just a heck of a lot that can happen. So we're happy to make that document available to anybody, or actually the link to the State Chamber of Commerce. Obviously, we're days away, a lot of days, probably weeks away from a lot of the businesses opening. I'll be quick here. We have a virtual happy hour that St. Peter Chamber does at 4:30 p.m. today. Happy to make that link available. We sent it out last night. And finally, bingo at 7 o'clock tonight. This will be our third cheesy chamber bingo. Wally Boyer of Jake's Pizza is the guest caller, so tune into that on Facebook Live. Todd, what do you got?
That's it. Thanks, Ed. We're going to rattle pretty quickly and turn it over to Russ, who's going to talk about give an update on the current COVID-19 microloan program and talk a little bit about what the EDA recommended to the council yesterday, which will be on the council meeting Monday night. So Russ, if you want to do that, that'd be great.
Thanks, Todd. Things have slowed down a bit. We've got a number of loans out so far. We've made 39 loans for a total of $341,000. And I have another 2 that we'll close on this afternoon. It's a very simple 2-page application that's available on the city's website, stpetermn.gov, and you'll go to doing business, and then it would be COVID-19 business resources. We're still accepting applications. We haven't set a deadline yet, but I would expect at some point they will establish one, but I think that's a ways off. This is the $10,000 0% interest loans. We're going to calculate your maximum loan based on your rent and mortgage payments plus your utilities and multiply that by 5. So if you have monthly expenses of $2,500, you'll qualify for sorry, thanks Todd, by 4. We multiply it by 4. And so if you have monthly expenses of $2,500, you would qualify for the maximum loan amount. Some then have qualified for smaller loan amounts. We secure that with a promissory note, and I apologize, my phone is ringing. And it's Jeff Knutson from Public Works, so he can wait. Eligible business classes were, the EDA's recommended that be expanded. We had an EDA meeting yesterday. They are recommending that the program be expanded to include birthing centers as well as medical offices. And medical offices would be such as dentists, podiatrists, chiropractors, and those that are licensed for the practice of healing arts. The zoning ordinance would define those as. So those are still open. We're going to continue to accept applications, and I think the money's been of help. There is an article in the Free Press today, and so that's what we've got going on with COVID-19, and hopefully on Monday night the council will provide an expansion and we can get some assistance to some of the other business sectors. Back to you, Todd.
Hey, Patrick, you're up next. I know that there's some legislation that I think has been reported that the president is likely to sign either today or Monday. And so I think you're giving us an update on some of that.
Yeah, a couple of new things just in the public affairs realm here in general to touch on. Just to expand on what Ed was saying about some of these new standards out for practices, et cetera. Hope everyone saw, yesterday the governor did release a new executive order. It's 20-40 that starts this whole process of reopening business in a phased approach. So basically, if you were an industry or sort of a manufacturer that wasn't already open because you were critical, you're now allowed to open, as are individuals that work in an office setting. You're now allowed to reopen. The caveat to all of that, a couple things. One, if you are able to continue to work remotely, you're required to do so. So, just because you run an office doesn't mean that you should have all your employees come back if they can work remotely. The other piece of that is every business that will be newly reopening has to implement a COVID-19 protection plan for their office. And that is speaking to kind of what Ed was talking about. The Minnesota Chamber has put out a template that businesses could use to sort of adopt and tweak for their own, to come up with their own COVID-19 prevention protection plan for their office. The U.S. Department of Labor and Industry also has come out with a template that businesses can adapt on their own. Businesses don't need to use either of those templates. They can create whatever works for them as long as it follows CDC guidelines or OSHA guidelines. The state will not require those plans to be submitted, but if there is sort of ever an issue, the state can ask that you produce that plan, and that plan needs to be signed off by sort of the chief manager or owner of the company and posted for all employees to see. And so that sort of goes into effect Monday. So you can, those businesses that weren't otherwise already considered critical can open up Monday under that new order. Basically everything customer facing, if you involve sort of personal interaction with customers, continues to be not allowed at this point, although e-commerce is allowed and servicing e-commerce is allowed. So if you're selling products online and you're using your office to distribute those, you're welcome to continue to doing that. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that we, as Ed said, we do have that up on our blog post, a summary of that new order, and then the links to everything you're going to need to be able to link to related to that. So that's greatermankatoblog.com. So be sure to check that out. The other piece related on the federal side is Congress has passed sort of a re-injection of funding for the Paycheck Protection Program and the Emergency Impact Disaster Loan Program through SBA. I'm assuming that the president will sign that here today, and then it's yet to be seen when new loans will start being processed again. So stay tuned for that. But Congress provided an additional $310 billion for the Paycheck Protection Program and about another $60 billion for the Economic Impact Disaster Loan Program. So if you are interested in either of those two programs, I guess my recommendation would be to apply as soon as possible. I think there's a lot of speculation that both of those funds will run dry again in relatively short order. So if you do want to take advantage of it, put yourself in a position to apply as soon as they reopen. So with that, I think I'm done talking and happy to answer any questions if there are any.
That's great. Thanks, Patrick. If anybody has any questions, if no one kind of hits their microphone, I'll ask my quick question to Patrick, and then we'll move on to the next agenda items. I'm scanning my screen, using my bifocals. All right, Patrick, I have one other question or maybe a clarification on that. If I'm a business that had not applied previously for those SBA dollars, I should get in right now anyway, right? Fill out that application. Okay.
Yeah, if you applied previously for the economic impact loan, your application should still be there, and hopefully SBA will now be circling back to one, depositing the up to $10,000 grant portion. So this is that on the EIDL loan side, not the Paycheck Protection Program side.
Yep.
But on the EIDL loan program side, what SBA has essentially done is said it's an up to $10,000 grant, and they're basing it sort of on your employee count. So $1,000 per employee. So if you have 10 or more employees, you'll get the full amount. Anything less, you'll get $1,000 per employee. But that is strictly a grant. Even if you don't end up taking the loan, you can still get that grant and keep those dollars. So would strongly encourage any business that hasn't applied for that EIDL loan program to at least do it to get the grant portion. The caveat to that is you can only get that $10,000 once between the paycheck program and the EIDL loan program. So if you get $10,000 from EIDL and you get $50,000 in a grant from the paycheck program, you're only going to get forgiven $40,000 of that paycheck program. So you can't double count that $10,000 bucks. But yeah, if your application's already in, it's going to be processed, and hopefully SBA will get back to you soon. You know, and then on the paycheck side, if sort of your bank has all your information and they're just waiting for it to reopen the process, you should be good to go. If not, you know, reach out to your preferred bank to get them sort of all the documents they would need and get that lined up so that as soon as the application portal turns back on for the banks, they can process that request.
All right, thank you. That's super helpful. One last call for Patrick. Any questions from the group assembled for Patrick? Hit your microphone and we'll make things go. Other than that, if we don't have any, we're going to move to John in just a moment. Scan the screen one more time. I don't see anyone. So John Considine's here with us again. John, I know you were going to talk about a couple of things as well, but I'll leave it to you.
Sure. Thanks, Todd. Wanted to just highlight a couple of things. I assume it's still helpful to drop some links into the chat box. So I'm going to do that just so that everyone can check in on some of those resources Ed was referencing and Patrick was referencing. The first one I want to drop in there is from the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development. So this is a resource for reviewing that Executive Order 2040. I want to put that as MND'd into the chat box. That one can kind of lay out, you know, the plan for safely returning to work. The other link that I want to drop in there really quick is the link to the Minnesota Department of Labor and Industry. The first item on this page is an example of that template for instructions. Like Ed referenced, the state chamber has one as well. So I'm going to put that one in there for everybody to take a look at. And I'm going to call that one Minnesota Labor. So those are both into the chat box for follow-up. Between those two, that should get you a pretty good understanding. You know, if you don't like some of the things in the template from the state, you can definitely reference other sources like the Minnesota Chamber. All of it's good. The important part is you need to have a plan. And I think, everyone here would be on the same page with that, making sure that it can't be business as normal at this point, but that's what we're working towards, and it needs to be a phased approach. Shifting gears really quickly here, I just wanted to highlight some of the current economic metrics. We've seen a lot of state numbers in terms of unemployment. We typically get unemployment figures at what we call the MSA level, the Metropolitan Statistical Area, and that's composed of Blue Earth and Nicollet counties combined. During this time, we can get a little bit more detailed information, just drilling it down a little bit farther to the county level. And the state has put up a very helpful web source to lay out what those characteristics are by county. So in looking at Nicollet County, since March 15th, the unemployment figure all the way up to April 22nd, so just 2 days ago, 2,904 people unemployed. Now that represents about 13.7% of the labor force. To give a little bit of context, this is something that it's happening across the state, but Nicollet County has typically been one of the best performers, having one of the lowest unemployment rates in the state. Sometimes it has even dipped around under 2% in the most recent years. So you can see that it's increased quite a bit, jumping up, and it is to be expected. So we're trying to keep a pulse on how that's happening. For our part, we're wanting to inventory all those different businesses that are looking to ramp up employment at this point, and we're collaborating with the local career force center. So that's the state's office that works locally or regionally in South Central Minnesota. And if we hear about any employer that is needing to make some hires, we're passing that along to the state. They're really kind of busy with battling unemployment and making sure that all those items are processed through. So we're just trying to feed into existing processes so that they can take those employment opportunities and share them with people that are currently seeking unemployment and see if it's a fit for them or not to consider those employment options.
All right, John, thanks for that info. It'll be interesting to see over the next month or two how that jumps back closer to normal, because we're hoping it's going to jump back. I know probably a lot of those numbers relate to North Mankato, in a couple of manufacturing areas in North Mankato, probably.
Absolutely. Yeah, it can sway a lot.
Yeah. All right. John, anything else you wanted to highlight, or should we go back to Russ and talk about United Way?
I'm all set.
All right, Russ, I know we wanted to mention a little bit about United Way and the Mankato Area Foundation. So Russ is going to take over my chair for just a second and talk about the United Way and the Mankato Area Foundation.
Sorry about that. Had a little technological problem. I lost all my my audio. I couldn't hear anything. So I took off the headphones and that didn't work either, listening on the speakers. So United Way, we've touched on this. We're just going to be very brief. This is assistance to our nonprofit business sector. The Mankato Area United Way and Mankato Area Foundation have joined together to provide that assistance, and you can contact the Mankato Area Foundation directly. Also, they have the 211 hotline for volunteers. You call 211, enter in your zip code, and it'll provide you opportunities where you could serve as a volunteer or where your organization could access volunteer services. I'm going to move on. And again, we've talked about this the last couple months, so we'll just touch on it. This is the financial assistance for the veterans, honorably discharged veteran, Minnesota resident, or surviving spouse who hasn't remarried. They have a $1,000 relief grant. Then they have a $3,000 special needs grant. The relief grant goes to the veteran. The special needs grant then would go directly to vendors, so to pay your rent, to pay your mortgage, to pay your utilities, to keep the lights on, etc. Call Nathan Tisch, the Nicollet County Veteran Service Officer. He'd love to hear from you if you're a veteran. 934-7870. I'm going to turn things back over to Mr. Prafty. He's going to talk about an issue that's pending here, and we hope that everybody's going to be participating. Ed talked about best practices. The Department of Employment and Economic Development is actually having some webinar this afternoon. Hopefully I can participate in, get some more information on that. The Department of Labor, Patrick said, is likely to have some guidance in any future executive order that would reopen. The businesses will probably have some restrictions or requirements in it, like 2040 did, to have a plan, etc. So, Mr. Prafke, you want to talk about the last topic before we go to the questions and answers?
Yeah, let's just talk about census really quick. We do want to mention for folks, if they haven't filled out census material, please do that. We're in a competition with Mankato and North Mankato. So John and Patrick, don't tell them about our plan here. But we are just about at 70% of households responding. For every person that is not counted in our area, it means about $15,000 over the next decade. So we want to get people going on that. So if you haven't done it, please do it. We'd appreciate it. Now, question and answers. Anybody got questions about anything that we talked about, or any of the other issues that you might have? Any other concerns? I'm going to watch for microphones to open up here just a little bit. Oh, Carrie's waving. Carrie, what do you got?
So I've been seeing in some of the guidance for returning to work that, and this was on the state chamber page too, that requiring a doctor's note if someone's sick. John or Patrick or Ed, do you have any thoughts on that? Because I've been a part of the Society of Human Resource Management calls with the CDC deputy director, and he has said not to require doctor's notes because it overwhelms the healthcare system. You don't want to bring more unhealthy people for mild symptoms into healthcare facilities. Just if someone's sick, they're sick. So I know that that's probably a business decision case by case, but have you heard that conflicting information?
I mean, on the executive order, it is pretty clear that no employee who is even suspected of being sick should be in the workplace. And I know that executive order that the governor just put out doesn't tie, sort of anything to the doctor's note. It just says if that employee is sick, they need to stay home, no exceptions. And so I guess, there's nothing requiring you to have a doctor's note to have an employee be home and sick. I mean, that's more of a business practice. But I think the general impression that I got from that order is all sick employees stay home and a no doctor's note required. And I think, part of that order also is, for businesses that will be opening on Monday or sort of newly eligible to open, one of the standards that they're supposed to implement is sort of screening of employees as they enter the workplace. And so, if that's sort of doing the, swipe across the forehead to check their temperature, et cetera. I mean, if they're running a fever, you're supposed to do an about face and walk right back out that door, So that's sort of as I understand it. I know there was some question about doctor's notes on the paid leave side and whether that would be required and whether some employers were requiring that. But on the paid leave side, even to get that federal paid leave, the federal government isn't requiring that the employer, sort of have the doctor's note either. So that'd just be the 2 cents on that.
All right, John, I see you have your microphone.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I dropped in a link, and I don't know if that's something that you had seen already, Carrie, but that is the link to the frequently asked questions for both employers and employees that the Minnesota Department of Labor and Industry put out. And it addresses some of the things in terms of rights for doctor's notes and that kind of stuff, laying out just common things. There might be some answers in there. I read through it yesterday, and I can't remember if it exactly answers your question, but that is the closest thing that I've come to in terms of resource for answering those types of things.
Yeah, thank you. That link is very helpful. And I think where I was coming from in our business at the co-op, we've been open this whole time. We were going off of guidance from what we were hearing from the CDC deputy director in those calls that, don't for an extended absence, just if they're sick, let them stay home, and don't require an extend or a doctor's note, in which most businesses have that policy of, we need a doctor's note for 3 consecutive absences, for instance. And our guidance was to forego that while we're in the pandemic. So thank you for answering my question and for those additional resources.
All right, Ed, I think Ed
clarify that.
Johnson had a question. Ed, why don't you go first?
Okay, this is for Patrick or John. I manage a bar in St. Peter. Is there any rumors flying around of when we are possibly going to be open? Are they going to extend to May 4th? Or?
No rumors. I guess I wouldn't suspect that you would be open on May 4th. The governor in his presentation yesterday had his dial, and sort of the congregate settings, the more intense congregate settings were pretty far on the right-hand side of that dial. So no rumors, but I guess I wouldn't be surprised to see the restaurant and bar closure go beyond the 4th.
When do you think he would announce something like that?
Hard to know. I mean,
Okay.
I think he wants to give as much lead time as possible, right? But it's hard to know.
Let me
Okay.
chime in, and I don't know anything more than Patrick does on this one, but it is something when we're watching and paying attention. It seems to me that his pattern on some of these things has been to announce 2 or 3 days in advance that the future, here's what's going to happen on a date certain 2 or 3 days in advance, Ed. So that's at least the pattern that I think I'm seeing. That doesn't mean anything will follow that necessarily into the future, but that kind of seems to be what I'm seeing.
Okay, thank you guys.
And Carrie, I just want to, when you said sort of, we've already been open, that just triggered one thing for me. This whole conversation about these new standards, sort of these COVID-19 protection plans that businesses are supposed to implement, that only applies to businesses that are newly eligible to reopen under the governor's order. And so if you were already open, which, all of our, sort of food providers were, if you had sort of a plan in place you were using already, you're good to go with that. You don't need to sort of create something new based on this new executive order. It's only for the businesses that will be newly eligible to reopen.
All right, last call. Ed, you had a question too. Ed Lee from the chamber.
Yeah, maybe just a quick one, like Patrick said, as we listen more, there's little triggers, and a lot has been talked about this protocol. And one of the things the state chamber director, his name is Doug Loon, pointed out is he really encourages business leaders to get together with their employees and create a plan together. They have to be on the same page. It just is going to make it more adoptable with employees and the business leaders coming up with the guidelines together and customizing it to their workplace.
All right, Ed, thank you. Any other questions before we kind of wrap up here? Any other questions before we wrap up? All right, everybody's mics seem to be staying muted. So here's the plan for next week. I think with the new legislation coming out and hopefully signed by the president either today, as Patrick indicated, or potentially on Monday, maybe we'll do a little bit more of a rundown on that next week. But I got to tell you, our peak today was probably 21 or 22. And so it's mostly, not to be too mean guys, but it's mostly us talking to each other. And so if we have other businesses that are interested, we'll redouble our efforts with the city and edit the chamber to see if other people have interest. And so next week we're on, the week after we may be off. We'll announce that next week at the meeting, but we'll be on and talk about a few of the things. We'll also have an update and a finalization if the council approves the microloan package change on Monday night. So we'll be able to review that as well. Is there anything else we should be looking at for next week that people really want to hear about or make sure that we're talking about, or they want to make sure that they offer that they're sharing, that we can make sure we get on the list? All right. Nobody's mic came on. Thanks to everyone, folks in Mankato, Patrick, John, thank you. Everybody else that's on today, thanks very much. That's a tight 30 minutes, so good for us. We're making them pretty efficient. Appreciate that. Stay healthy, take care of yourself, stay positive, test negative. We'll see you next time.